You are listening to the Whiskey Tango Chaos Podcast.
I'm a dinosaur at this point.
There's too many steps.
Yeah, it's like
I'm over here drinking maple syrup.
I think it's like the free space in the middle, basically. Like everybody gets it.
Use a condom, son.
What else you got? And the Space Force PR department sucks.
So what would your solution be to the retention?
The rest is history, as they say.
And the chaos starts now.
Welcome back to the Whiskey Tango Chaos Podcast. My name's Clayton Spakes, a Master Sergeant in the United States Air Force. I'm here with my wife, Amanda.
Yes, the resident Triceratops.
Yeah, and we are back after I guess it was a month break because we do these every other week, but we skipped a week. If you've been following along with the podcast, if you're a friend of the show, we moved to Texas in August, and then we finally moved into our house 2 weeks ago now. And so we had every intention of doing a podcast like the first night that we got in. That would have been when we had to do it. But it was just too chaotic. There was too much going on.
I forgot how stressful move-in day is, especially for all we had to do is stand there and check off numbers.
Yeah, you're watching everybody else move your stuff.
Yeah, but it was still, I forgot how stressful it was even for doing nothing.
It's a full day, and then keeping the tiny humans alive and the dogs, and just a lot going on that day. So in the midst of, and then your sister, Carrie, came out and helped us do some unpacking. So we wanted to take full advantage of that and also spend some time and do some stuff with her. So we chose to take a week off from the podcast.
Yes.
And now we are back, still in a room full of boxes.
Hey, but this is our first podcast in the official podcast room from you.
What will be our podcast studio / whiskey lounge.
Yes. Chaos headquarters.
That's on the short list of things to do. So if you want to see the progress on that, make sure you're following us on social media at Whiskey Tango Chaos on Facebook and Instagram. I'm sure we will show progress of what that looks like as we're building it out. I've kind of got some plans going, but kind of one of those things too, we won't know exactly what it's going to look like until we start getting things in the room. Right now, it is just a mess.
It's a cluster. It's a cluster. Yeah, I got 2 boxes to my left. We're using another box to prop up the Roadcaster and our whiskey. But we have found our boxes that were labeled. With every move, the packers are a little bit different. What rules they'll bend and what rules they won't. So they did graciously pack up a good bit of our collection, but they labeled the box liquids instead of alcohol.
They moved about a third of our whiskey.
Yeah.
And then
so we found
brought
our
a bunch of it with us because we're degenerates and couldn't go without it for a few months.
I mean, we were living in a camper. I feel like that was justified.
And then, of course, we added to the collection. And speaking of adding to the collection, before we move too far into this, let's get on to how we start every episode and talk about what we're drinking today. So, ladies first, what you got?
I'm going full lady on this particular whiskey that I'm trying tonight. It's from a distillery called Blackland. It is a Texas pecan brown sugar bourbon, and it is delicious. It's a little sweet. Well, it's very sweet.
Yeah,
but it's really good. I mean, it's
you guys aren't seeing this because it's not like we don't do video podcasts, but it looks like a bottle of syrup. Like it is.
It's not that thick.
And it's the color of molasses.
It's not that. It is that sweet, but it's not that thick. And it's only 35%. It's a very low proof.
Yeah, that is right up Amanda's alley.
Sipper,
like
but
she'll drink like you like regular whiskey or straight whiskey or whatever, but she's also a big fan of the two of us. She's more likely to go flavored, definitely more likely to go flavored whiskey. I almost always will avoid that. And she's also the one that's more likely to do a mixed drink, like an old-fashioned or something like that, where I tend to just drink straight.
But yeah, it's I
do love a good mixed drink, but really I'm just lazy. Like that's the problem.
There's too many steps.
Yeah, it's like when I go to get the stuff, I like set the stuff out on the counter to make an old-fashioned, and then I immediately regret that decision and just pour the whiskey.
I mean,
it's like, oh, this is easier.
That is a faster step to the process.
Yeah, and I'm drinking one that we picked up. I've been saving this for the podcast. But it's one that I picked up about a month ago, actually. If you remember back a few episodes, we talked about our friendly neighborhood liquor store out here, Alamo City Liquor. This one is from Texas. It's called Still Austin, and it's a limited release that's also a barrel pick from Alamo City Liquor. And this is their single barrel cask strength bourbon, 58% barrel dumped in June. And then it's got the barrel number on it, so pretty good. Yeah, that is very tasty.
Is it? Can I try it?
Yeah, so we've, I can't remember. I think our friend BB, recommended this to us. And I believe Lang recommended this to us. And then the owner of Alamo City, when we were there, we were looking for something else. And this happened to have just been released with their barrel pick while we were there. And it is absolutely cast drink. I wish you guys could have seen Amanda take that sip. She went full she went full like sophomore in high school. I just had my first shot.
Listen, first of all,
maybe I just revealed too much about my life that sophomore in high school was.
That's when you're taking shots as a sophomore in high school?
Yeah, the Russians that worked so I was working at Chick-fil-A at the time, and the whole like kitchen staff, they were all Russians. They would always bring flavored vodka.
I feel like that's
Chick-fil-A.
fair. I think that's their version of water.
Yeah, so we would mix like flavored vodka with like High C or whatever, and then
Chick-fil-A.
just drink vodka in the back of the Lord's Chicken.
That's blasphemy.
I know.
So still Austin, that was very good. I think what got me though is I'm over here drinking maple syrup, and that is a stark contrast to my
cast
maple
strength. So
syrup
it's cast strength. So you definitely get the burn.
Yeah,
it is like not short on flavor though. It's definitely like, cause I've had some cast strengths that are like strong. They taste strong just for the sake of being strong, but the flavor's not there. This has like all of the flavor too. So you get, a lot of like the cinnamon and spiciness. And then a little bit of the, like on the back end, I'm getting more of the like mellowness, the caramelly notes, but it's very, very good. I'll definitely be looking forward to trying another bottle of Still Austin and maybe getting out there while we're in old Tejas. So like we said, we got moved into the house. We're still kind of unpacking everything and seeing how all that goes. So far, so good. And now it's just kind of getting into the flow of things, I guess, and trying to do, for anybody out here that's done done a PCS before, it's kind of we've reached the point where it's no longer frantic, I guess.
Yeah.
We're a little more settled, but there's still just a shit ton of stuff to do. So there's constantly a lot of the unboxing and just getting organized.
We're at the point where like the to-do list is just, it's getting longer, but more manageable, where I don't feel like I'm drowning, where I have to get like 10 things crossed off at the same time.
And there's less coordination, I think, at this point. Like we've gotten to the point where the rest of the stuff is kind of on us, right? So yeah, that's kind of our life update. Well, this podcast will probably be a little bit of a shorter one. We're relying a lot on you guys for this one. So we put out a few questions, and I'll let Amanda kind of take over and lead the conversation here.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that we enjoy about this, and one of the reasons why we started this podcast was to just have conversations with people. And that's, one of the ways that we're able to do that is through our social medias and posting questions to you guys and seeing the feedback. And this past week, we actually reached out to you and asked, what was the worst advice you have ever received? Could be career, could be otherwise. And we actually got some really interesting responses to that. So this first one is actually from a friend, Hovis. The worst advice he's ever received was, you shouldn't re-enlist and go to Afghanistan. That mission is so fulfilling.
Yeah, well, first of all, Hovis, congrats on your retirement. A very productive career and made a huge impact on a lot of us as we were coming up. He was my boss for, probably 3 or 4 years while we were at Right Pat together. Probably the most technically proficient NCO that I had ever come across, and senior NCO by the time he left there, but made a huge impact on us, made all of us better, and was maybe one of the funniest people I've ever been around, and a hell of an asset on a trivia team too.
Oh yeah, I remember doing trivia with him a couple of times at Fox. And
he was there he was there with us pretty much every Wednesday.
The wealth of knowledge that he had of just random stuff.
Yeah, but congrats on your retirement. And yeah, I also was duped by that one. Although I enjoyed my time in Afghanistan, and in Iraq I was probably too naive. But by the time I went to Qatar a couple of years ago, I was over it. I was just done with CENTCOM. We moved on to other more complex, more interesting problem sets, and then get sucked back into Qatar. And it feels almost like you went back in time. You're like, where is it? Like 2011 again? Like, are we still, what are we doing? Yeah. I think that one gets a lot of us, but luckily it seems like most of that's slowing down. Certainly not the footprint it was, 5-10 years ago.
Okay, so this next one for what was bad advice you received came in from my good friend Amy. Don't ever second guess yourself because you're a woman. I think she said it was good advice just given to the wrong person. And I guess that makes sense. Like, it depends on the type of person that you are. If you are sure and confident in yourself and in the job or the task that you're doing, and you're told to not second guess, because of who you are, just keep plowing forward. Well, sometimes you're second guessing yourself, and you know for a fact that something's a little off. And instead of just plowing forward because of gender, whatever, it's okay to stop and take a moment to adjust the course if you need to.
Yeah, I obviously can't speak to the being a woman part, but I would imagine that probably does present its own sorts of challenges, especially in my line of work, just because if you look around, it's got to be well over 80. I mean, I should probably know the numbers, but well over 80%. And I think that's certainly changed in the 18 years that I've been in. It's a lot more welcoming in general. And that's speaking for all things. I think it's more welcoming for different political views or different social views. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't still have a long way to go and that there's not still issues, but it's certainly different. I can certainly imagine that there are times where you would feel like you had to second guess yourself as a female, in the military. I can recognize that is not necessarily the case for me, right? A lot of the people that I've worked with look and act and talk a lot like me.
Yeah, I think, I think it goes down to just knowing the person who you're giving that advice to. Some people need that reassurance of, hey, just don't second guess yourself. You know what you're doing, keep going. You got this.
See, I was going to say to put a spin on that you should be second guessing yourself. That, to me, at least the way that I like to operate, I guess, I will always second guess myself, and I'm my harshest critic. But to me, it's not that I'm trying to be down on myself, or I think that I'm incapable of making decisions or whatever. It's that I think it's the most important thing for me always tends to be self-reflection. So if I'm at work and I'm having an issue with one of my subordinates or people in my flight or whatever the case may be, my first thought is, human nature. Sometimes my first thought is what a fucking idiot. Why are they doing that? Right. But then hopefully my second thought is all right, what did I do that contributed to us being in this position? What could I have done that made them think that behavior was okay? Or was I holding this person accountable enough before it got to this point? And sometimes the answer is no, but I found that really helps me to come into feedback and things like that with a level head and a better perspective, as opposed to, I've seen guys do it, and I was guilty of it when I was younger in my career, that if I had somebody that I had to counsel or get onto, that a lot of times I would jump straight into, I'm going to go in there and tell them all the ways that they were wrong and how they're never going to do this again. And even if you weren't necessarily coming down on them with it something harsh, it was just a whole lot of well, you did this wrong, this is your fault, you got to fix it. And, obviously I'll be here for you, but blah, 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 blah. Where the older I've gotten and more experience, I tend to look at myself first and what could I have done differently to have helped mitigated or avoided that situation in the first place. And then what is their behavior? And then circle back to me and okay, how do we fix this? And making sure that I can be there with you.
So you look at second guessing as self-reflection, not necessarily lack of confidence.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly both, right? There's certainly people that second guess themselves because they're not confident. But I've seen people give the advice of don't second guess yourself. And then it just turns into blind confidence in yourself that's not justified for any reason, right? I think, but if you get to a point where you can second guess yourself because through self-reflection, then it almost makes you in my experience, it's made me more confident as a leader and more confident in the decisions that I make, because I know that I've thought this through. I also know that if something goes wrong, then I'll kind of take stock and then take accountability, and I'm willing to kind of make that change. I think there's a lot of strength and confidence that comes in being able to reflect and realize that sometimes when things go wrong, it was on me. It was my fault, even if it manifested itself in one of my troops. Anyway, yeah, we took a whole different spin on that, I think.
Woo. But hey, that's what this is for, right? All right. We'll lighten the mood a little bit here. Again, worst advice you ever got. This one comes in from your buddy BB. use a condom, son.
Yeah, he's got like 37 kids.
This one makes me laugh just because
He made me spit my whiskey out when we were drinking, when I read it the first time. So, I mean, it seems to have worked out for him. He's got like a whole football team over there.
He does. So. He's, definitely.
It's also why he has an impressive whiskey collection, though, I'm pretty sure.
With that many young children running around the house, it requires an impressive whiskey collection.
Yeah, I mean, my collection grew like exponentially with just 2 kids. So, like, he deserves like an entire vault.
All right.
Do it.
The next one comes from Muleman, and he was on the podcast a couple episodes ago.
Him and Ian, yep. That was the last one in Ohio.
The AFI says don't write your own EPRs and decks?
Yep.
Did I say that right?
Yeah, your EPRs and decorations. Yeah, so
decorations.
Technically per the AFI, you should never be writing your own. Your supervisor should always be the one doing it.
Does your supervisor ever do it?
I mean, when I was younger, I would say they probably did like the lion's share of it, right? Because now it's different. So when I first came in, like I'm a dinosaur at this point, but like when I first came in, they did EPRs like right away. Now you don't even get an EPR until you've been in for like 3 years, until you're a senior airman getting ready to put on staff. You certainly start doing more and more of it yourself. And I would say by the time you are about to put on staff, like you're probably doing 100% of it on your own, with your supervisor just like providing some tweaks and then sending it back for corrections or whatever the case may be. But like the reason that's terrible advice is the same reason, is because it directly contradicts a lot of the other advice, or one of the other big pieces of advice that we're given, which is nobody will care more about your career than you. So if you're leaving it up to your supervisor to write it, they're doing a million other things. If you can't be bothered to like write it up and put it in a format that makes it easier for them to just have to tweak it or make and give like small improvements, as opposed to writing it from scratch, then like you're probably doing yourself a disservice. Also, then you get to have the control over like, what you did that year, or what you did during that assignment for a decoration. Now you get the opportunity to highlight what you think is important. Yeah. But yeah, to Mule's point, awful advice to be the one that like, if the hill that you're going to die on is that you refuse to care enough about your career to write your own EPRs or decorations, then that's a tough one.
The next bit of awful advice comes from Cheyenne Bauer. You worked with her husband.
Blaine, yep.
Yeah. Don't tell people you're a mill spouse.
But yeah, I think so. Man, that one's like mixed reviews, right? Because you've had situations like when we were in Ohio the first time where like it being married to me certainly backfired.
Yep. They said, you're a military spouse. We don't know how long we're going to have you, so we're not going to promote you. My career is something that I care about. So knowing that, like moving forward, it definitely affected me on how I interviewed for future jobs. And when promotions came up at those jobs, how I would interview for those. And, when they would ask me like, how long are you going to be here? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I would give very generic, working for this company answers, because I was so concerned that they would take more weight in me being a military spouse than my work.
They don't want to invest in it because you may just leave. Well,
and I don't think it affected me moving forward. And so I get that, but she said that she's embraced it and it's actually helped her.
Well, I think like too, it's not that they're not putting more value on you being a mill spouse, or like that they're not devaluing your work. They're just, from them, it's like a straight up business decision almost. Why invest all of this time and money into this person that may only be there for a year or two when they can find somebody that's going to make that spot a career? But I think what's helped I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I can understand that perspective. But I think what's helped you a lot too is like, one, just being like having more experience, but also moving into the kind of the government sector, doing like government contracting, where it's way more common to have people in the building that they're either prior military or like they're also a military spouse, or they're like guard or whatever.
Yeah, it's a lot more commonplace. So it's not they don't bat an eye when they say, where does your husband work?
Well, when you leave, they're like, cool. Well, when you leave, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it certainly helps now, like in this kind of post-COVID era, I guess, where we're seeing a lot more remote work and things like that, where it's easier to keep people around if you're in a job where that's a lot able to be accomplished. Yeah.
You got to feel it out, but embrace it.
Yeah, I think you definitely should. I mean, it's like, that's also the way that you like embracing it and not hiding it is also the way that you can put yourself out there and kind of make more friends and get more kind of ingrained and entrenched in the like community.
Well, that was, I mean, it was, I thought that was, thank you for all of you who participated and left a comment and shot us a message and shared your bad advice. That was pretty interesting. Some of it.
What about you? What's your worst advice you ever got?
My worst advice? Oh, I kind of have one that kind of came to mind. I don't know if it's really the worst advice I've ever gotten. I think surely I've gotten worse advice that's just not coming to my head because I'm thinking on my feet here. But the whole you can sleep when you're dead.
Yeah, that's a good one.
My personality mixed with like the way that we were raised, I'll run myself into the ground. Like I'll run 1,000,000 miles a minute and juggle everything that I possibly can because there's always time to sleep later. Yeah, and I have a problem saying no. So that advice of you can sleep when you're dead. I'm like, yeah, you're right.
That's pretty good.
Let me just do one more thing. And next thing you know,
I actually had that conversation a couple of times at work this past week where one with like some of my guys where I was just saying like at the end of the day, to me, like all of my like job stuff, like that's just work. It's not what's important to me, like long term. Like, yes, it's important to me because it's a means to an end for my family, but it's easy for me to kind of like separate and not get too worked up about stuff like that when I'm in that building because it's so compartmentalized for me where it's like, now don't get me wrong. I'm still human. Like there's days where stuff will happen and I come home and I'm like, oh geez, like today was fucking ridiculous. Like I need to break open the whiskey now. Yeah. For the most part, like I'm able to like, that's kind of just my mindset while I'm there. It's like, yep, I'll do what I can while I can when I'm here, but there's definitely a time every day where like I'm going to knock it off. That doesn't mean I don't work late some nights when I need to, but there's always a line and a balance with those sort of things. To me, this is just work. So I'll get done what I can get done and I'll be okay with that and then move on to the next day, live to fight another day.
Yeah.
Cause at the end of the day, like that, like in 2 years, all this stuff will be gone. Right. But what will still be here is like the relationships that I've like my relationships with my family, with you and the boys and my relationships with, like friends and, and like that sort of stuff. So I'll always make sure that I keep that in mind and prioritize things because I suffered from that same thing when I went through a phase where I was kind of suffering from that same thing where it's like, never say no, like work, and do everything I can to make sure that, I can always be the person that can be counted on. But I found that there's room to be the person that can be counted on and also like keep your priorities squared away too.
Yeah.
I would say my worst advice that I ever got is, yes, you should definitely get married when you're 20, just so that your high school sweetheart, so you don't have to run the risk of breaking up with your high school sweetheart. That's number one worst advice I ever got.
Did it work out for you?
I mean, I would say that it didn't work out, but two things, like in order to be the stereotypical disgruntled NCO or senior NCO, I did need one divorce under my belt. So I was glad to.
Where is that?
I was glad to aggressively check that box. I think it's like the free space in the middle, basically. Is like everybody gets it.
Oh, okay.
All right. So I got that one. Aggressively checked that one off early.
So we have a question actually that got submitted a little bit ago from Mr. Chad Halling.
What's up, buddy?
He wants to know retraining. Mm-hmm. Should it be as difficult as it should be, and is it hurting retention?
Oof. I'm going to go full non-committal here and say it depends.
Wow.
So
I mean, we are in the political season, so wait right at that fence there, sir.
So I think that there are ways that retraining could be easier, and it would certainly help with retention. I don't know. I find myself like, I used to think that it was terrible that like it should just be a free for all and you should be allowed to retrain, kind of think of it like the transfer portal for like the Air Force, right? You should get like one or two. You do kind of get one. So like as a first term airman, you can retrain, but the downside there is like a lot of times you don't really know enough to know whether you want to retrain yet. Or that like a lot of these opportunities like pop up when you're later into your career, when you have a better understanding of what careers are out there and what you want to do. Like you're asking, so think if somebody comes in when they're 18, their first enlistment is done when they're 22, either 22 or 24. So you're asking a 22-year-old to like know what they want to be when they grow up, right? Essentially,
I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
That's kind of like what you're doing and it's, but then the flip side of it is like, I totally get it. Right. So for like my career field, for instance, right, they put a lot of money and time into getting us trained. So whether that's for the clearances or for actual training or whatever. So then to just like release me from my career field to go do something else should be like a difficult thing, right? Because you're not going to like, not that I'm irreplaceable, but it is difficult to replace somebody with like, it's going to be difficult for it to be a 1-for-1, right? Because it takes time. Like, yes, you can get other people into the career field, but you're not going to be able to 1-for-1 replicate the experience that was lost from the person that you allowed to leave the career field.
Well, I think a little bit to kind of go back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier. I mean, this sounds awful, but if you look at it strictly from like a business perspective, if you've spent X amount of dollars training somebody, you don't really want to lose that.
But then the flip side of it, right, is if you're not allowing people to retrain,
you're going to lose them anyway?
Yeah, it's like Chad said, like, does it hurt retention? I would say it probably does. Imagine like you come into a job and you're just miserable. You hate that job. You don't want to do it.
Right.
And they're not giving the option to, you're not given the option to try something different. So you're just going to quit. And then, oh, by the way, also that person who's miserable in their job, probably not the greatest influence to everybody else around them. It's tough. I would love to see like career airman retraining be more open, have it happen a lot more, especially if they could make it be like
a career though. Like what, like
after your first term. So like anytime after you've re-enlisted. Career? Like maybe if they worked, like maybe if there was some sort of process where it worked kind of the way that they're talking about doing with assignments now, where like, say you and I each had an assignment and we were the same rank and that sort of stuff. But I wanted to go where you were going and you wanted to go where I was going. They're supposedly working out a process where like we can make that work. Right. And I've heard of that happening like in tech school and stuff, but I don't think it doesn't really happen for career airmen. Maybe we could set up some sort of process where you could do that for retraining with career airmen. Right. So if you have a guy so like Chad security forces and I'm intel, if he wanted to like retrain into intel and I wanted to retrain into security forces, I don't. But if I did, like, then maybe there could be some sort of thing there where you're getting like a master sergeant for a master sergeant. It's still not 1-for-1, right? Because like Chad has all of his experience as security forces and a Raven and doing his other like security office stuff, right? That I wouldn't be able to replace, but you're at least getting kind of like the right rank. I think anytime that you can give the member a little more control of their own career, because it seems like the way that we're going is that military and government is going to have to mimic private sector industry if they want to continue to stay competitive in terms of getting the right talent in the right places. Because I feel like I see a lot more people come in, take advantage of the training, learn a lot, do their like 4 years or 6 years, usually only 4 now, and then get out and go make a lot more money doing it, using those skills on the outside, whether they work for the government or go work for regular industry.
Retention across the board. It doesn't matter what branch or career field. It seems to be having issues. Like that seems to be a hot.
And there's a lot that goes along with that, right? Like we talked about inflation and stuff like that a lot, right? So especially on the enlisted side, when you're asking people to come in and making what they're making as like an airman, it's tough. Now it's decent money if you're talking about somebody like me, like right out of high school, like it wasn't bad money because I like, what the hell did I have to offer? Right. Like I didn't have any real skills.
Yeah. You're starting off.
Right. So it's not that it's terrible, but I think the other thing is like, as a society, it seems like we value different things now than we valued, 18 years ago. And there's a lot of things contribute to that. Right. So think about guys that came in around the time that I did. So I came in 2004. We were still very much riding the wave of like the post 9/11 patriotism. And now we've been in an era where even though we're still have a footprint in CENTCOM, and we just left Afghanistan, we were there for so long that everybody kind of became like desensitized to it all together. And it wasn't really like this kind of thing that brought people together and like it was in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
If anything, like as a country, we're just more divided and more divisive now than we were. And it makes things even more difficult, makes people even less likely to join.
So what would your solution be to the retention?
For me, it lies way more in the things we were talking about on the last episode, where it's like, you have to be competitive with pay, because unless like people's basic needs are met, then none of the rest of the stuff matters. Right. Mm-hmm. So if you're not paying people enough and taking care of them, then the rest of it is just window dressing. So like job satisfaction and being happy with like the exact job that you're doing to me is only important after they fix the other problems. Make sure that BAH is right. And so people can live in a house, make sure that they're getting pay increases that kind of keep up with the inflation at least, or at least attempting to, and then find creative ways to get around those things. And then from there, then you start looking at the other things, whether it's retraining or more opportunities to commission, which there's already like a good amount of ways to commission. Something else I think that could be helpful too is just providing like a different path to not necessarily even stay in the military, but like go like from military to government civilian. Make it a program where there's a smooth transition, where it's not just like, oh, I got out of the military and there happened to be a job. Make it where there's like kind of like an internship path or something like that. But to me, kind of like the reason I think that could be important is you get a lot of guys that they like the technical aspect or the work part of their job, and they just want to continue to do that. And that'd be a good way to retain those people for like the government as a whole. And then you have that continuity, which is a lot of what the civilian workforce is for, right? They can tend to be able to have the time to be a lot more specialized, and then provide continuity for the mission at their location, as us military guys rotate out every 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, that makes sense, because the division that I work for, we're on our third commander. You rely heavily on the people that have been there for like 20, 30 years to keep that continuity.
And I think
going.
they do try to hire those, right? So like the first unit that I was at in Ohio, a lot of times, like most of those civilians, they were hired after getting out of the military in that office. But I think I've seen in other places where that's not the case, where it's not as easy of a transition. And I think that's something where we could put a little more time and thought into it, and maybe make it a program that just offers people like another avenue to where they feel like they're taken care of, and they get to do kind of the things that they want to do, and have the ability to kind of take control of their own careers. Some other interesting things that are happening. The Space Force is supposedly working on this thing that sounds like it will completely not work, because like everything else Space Force, they like overpromise, underdeliver. But they're trying to do this thing
there at all, it sounds like.
Their ideas are great, and they may work out eventually, but whoever their PR person should all be, their whole PR department, they are terrible. They come up with these grand ideas that they think will work, and then they'll send out a roadshow and talk about it like it's fact. And then 3 months later, they have to roll it all back because they realize that this lofty plan just is completely not feasible. But they're talking about giving people the ability to jump back like in and out of active service. So you could, do like 4 years, and then you decide you want to take a break for whatever reason, whether it's like life or whatever, and you could just go reserves. But then 2 years later, maybe you decide you're ready to go back active, and you can just jump back into active duty service. But now that sounds great. Go ahead.
I'm trying to figure out how that would work, because I feel like I could be completely wrong, but I feel like the couple of folks I've talked to that are reservists, they have like there's a different track for them completely, like how they like to promote, how they do stuff.
It's definitely different.
All that stuff. So how do you?
One, you have to keep track of. One, you have to keep track of promotions. Two, the Space Force is like way smaller, right?
That's true.
So say you left. Well, I think it's a detriment here. So say you left active service at like where I was when I left. So say I went reserves and I was in OPSUIT.
Okay.
There's only so many of those positions in the Space Force. And they're saying you would be able to just jump right back into it. So you're saying I could decide like 2 years later, hey, I'm ready to jump back in. Like there's no way it'll actually happen. Well, like it's just the logistics of it just don't work out, because when I leave, that position still has to be filled.
Right.
They still are going to do those things. They're going to continue operating like they did without me.
The wheels don't stop turning. The wheels don't stop turning. They constantly have to be moving. So it's like you jump back in whatever is available. If you're jumping back in,
there's definitely like a jumping off point to get into like the reserves or the guard. That part of it makes sense. It's the getting back that becomes, or getting back and saying that you'll be able to stay like in your own position. And like their response was basically like, well, if you were good enough to be an SEL already, then your record would speak for it, and they would find a space for you. You're like, yeah, bro, it doesn't work that way because there's only so many spaces, especially in the Air Force. But for the like doing guard and reserves, like that avenue already exists. Like they already have Palace Chase, Palace Front, where you could get out and just go reserves or guard. But the getting back in part is certainly more.
Yeah, because that part doesn't make sense to me. So you get out. There are a line of people behind you that are going to be learning over the next 4 years and maybe present the skills and the talent to then be promoted to the position that you're currently at. They don't get bumped because you just decide you want to come walking back in the door after 4 years.
Yep.
That doesn't make any sense to me. I just don't understand how that works. I get the
I
jumping out part, but I don't get the jumping back in part.
I guess I say all that to say, I know that we just shit all over their whole idea and the Space Force's PR department. Again, like if you need help, like hire me. It's not that hard. The reason I brought it up in the first place was that at least they're trying to be innovative and think of ways to make it so that they get retention and so that they get the people that they need. Anyway, that was quite the tangent there. Defund the commissary and the Space Force PR department sucks. That's what you learned here on Whiskey Tango Chaos. What else you got? You got any more questions this week?
Yeah, we got 2 more. And these actually, this came from our website. So if you actually go to whiskeytangochaos.com, you can get email updates from us when new podcasts release, when we have new merch drop.
Yeah, you can buy our shit.
You can buy our shit.
You can also donate to the cause. We'll make sure to get some whiskeys. If you have a recommendation that you want us to buy, feel free to donate there.
Matt's been dropping some recommendations a lot.
Bunch. I'm jealous of Matt's whiskey budget.
Yeah,
he's got a lot more.
Budget, sir.
He's been able to be a lot more active than I have lately with the closing of the house. That's for me. That's like part of it too. Is like I enjoy the hunt, like going and walking around and going to different liquor stores and trying to find stuff. But yeah, he's been on a kick lately. He's found some really good ones. I'm interested to see how they turned out.
So these 2 questions came from our website. First one goes to you, Clayton. Why did you get into the military in the first place?
I wish that I had like some elaborate story of like, oh, I wanted to serve my country. And then, you saw like a bald eagle fly over my head and all those sort of things.
National
but really
was
like
playing in the background.
Yeah. What it came down for me. So both my grandparents, like both my granddads were in the military. On my mom's side, he was retired from the Air Force. And then on my dad's side, he was a Marine. I'm sure that had some influence on just like knowing that it was a career path that I could take or whatever. But for me, like really what it boiled down to is when I was getting near the end of college, and I'm sure like 9/11 had some of that effect too, where it was like, oh, like this is an option. And it's like a respected profession, I guess, like something that I could do with my time, that not necessarily that I was looking for respect, but just in like, oh, this is like a real thing that you can do.
There's an immediate, it mattered.
Yeah. And be a part of like something bigger. Yeah. But then really like what it boiled down to, I said when I finished college, but what I meant was when I'm finishing high school, I saw all my friends applying to school. And at the time, like we talked about self-reflection earlier, right? And at the time I just thought that I was like, man, if I go to college, like I'm just not going to do it. Like I'll fail out and then I'll like be screwed. Like I might as well go do something, like let's go do something where I can go ahead and start making some money. And then I can revisit college later when I think I'm like a little more prepared to do it. But that's kind of where my brain was at the time.
How did that conversation go with your parents? I don't think I've ever asked you that. Did they see it?
Truthfully, don't remember much of it. I definitely had to have the conversation with them because when I decided I was going to join, I was still only 17. It was the summer of my junior year. I would imagine it was probably like pretty surprising. But both my parents were like, they were both really supportive. And I think part of that was just because of like I said, like both my granddads were in the military. So I think, and my mom grew up like her dad, like retired from the military, did like 20 years. So she was a military brat growing up. So she kind of knew kind of what that lifestyle was and like what, to some extent, what it could provide, although it's way different now than it was when they were in. So there wasn't as much hesitation there.
Our last question, and it's for me, and I get to read it to myself. Amanda, how did Clayton meet you / win you over?
I walked in the room.
Shut up. I actually met him. I was a bartender at Texas Roadhouse.
Still love Texas Roadhouse.
Yes, I still eat there. I was his bartender his first night back from Iraq. And here I am 10 years later, still serving you.
Yeah, that was where me and my buddy Jason went there with some of our friends on our first night back from Iraq for dinner. Met Amanda there, and the rest is history, as they say. Although it was not that quick.
No.
She made me work for it. It took me about 6 months, I think, to wear her down, but it eventually got there.
We just started doing like everything together. We were like, you would go out on dates and I would go out on dates, and then we would get together after our dates and talk about how bad they were. And we would go places to eat and go out to drink, and like we were just good friends. And then, we had gym membership to the same place, and so we'd go work out together. And I think it eventually kind of became one of those things where like we were just doing so much stuff together that we got close enough that it kind of just like happened, I guess, where it was kind of like everything just kind of clicked at some point where it was like, oh, like we have now, granted, like it clicked for me way earlier than that. Like I would have dated Amanda like well before that, but it took her a while to see my charm, but it all worked out eventually. You just have to wear her down, stay consistent. Yeah. Wear her down.
Bitches love consistency. That's what I heard. Put that one on a shirt too. All right. Well, I think that's going to be it for this episode of Whiskey Tango Chaos. Thank you guys for following along and being patient with us as we get all set up. Yeah, again, if you're looking to find us, you can find us at Whiskey Tango Chaos on all things social media or at whiskeytangochaos.com. These things are a lot more fun when they're interactive. So please, if you have questions, send them in through the social media or through the website. They can be personal questions for us or lifestyle questions or military questions. Happy to answer anything you got. We'll be back in a couple weeks with a different topic, maybe a dial-in guest or maybe an in-person guest. Ooh. If we can get the room set up. We'll figure out what that looks like. But again, thank you so much. If you're enjoying what you're listening to, please leave a review, like, and follow wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.